Google says its new model makes expensive AI pointless. It's not quite true, and the real story is better. On July 21st, 2026, Google shipped 3 models in one release, the widest simultaneous model drop Google's had this year. Gemini 3.6 Flash is the general-purpose workhorse. Gemini 3.5 Flash Lite is the smaller, cheaper sibling, roughly 2x faster than its predecessor at around 350 output tokens a second. Gemini 3.5 Flash Cyber is a third, specialized model we'll get to. All 3 landed the same day across Google AI Studio, the Gemini API, the Gemini app, Android Studio, Anti-Gravity, GitHub Copilot, and Vertex AI, and Flash Lite is also rolling into Google Search. Google's own numbers show real gains over its predecessor. On DeepSeek, an agentic coding benchmark, Gemini 3.6 Flash scores 49% versus 37% for Gemini 3.5 Flash. On MLE Bench, machine learning engineering tasks, it jumps to 63.9% from 49.7%. On OS World Verified, computer use tasks, it climbs to 83.0% from 78.4%. On GDP Valet AV2, a real-world knowledge work benchmark, its ELO style score goes to 1421 from 1349, an ELO style rating rather than a raw percentage. These numbers are corroborated across 925 Google, Mark Tech Post, and a VentureBeat requote, not just a Google press release. A few numbers that matter before we get to price. Context window is 1,048,576 tokens, call it 1M, with up to 65,136 tokens of output, enough headroom to hand it a mid-size codebase in one shot, not just a single file. Cached input runs $0.15 per 1M tokens, a 90% discount off standard pricing. Knowledge cutoff moved to March 2026, up from January 2025 on the prior generation. Independently, artificial analysis confirmed the 17% cut in output tokens versus Gemini 3.5 Flash, clocked its output speed at 251.3 tokens per second, ranked Sinicio under of 186 models tracked, and gave it an intelligence index of 50, good for $21 of 186, which it called well above the median of 31 for models in this price tier. Here's the whole point in code, using that $1.50 and $7.50 pricing directly. Import the SDK, pointed at Gemini 3.6 Flash. Send one prompt, a refactor request. Pull prompt token count and candidates token count off the response's usage metadata. Multiply by the real prices, $1.50 per 1M input tokens. $7.50 per 1M output. Print the cost. That's the entire cost model, no separate calculator needed. Run it against a real refactor task. 342 input tokens, 118 output tokens. Total cost $0.014. Cents, not dollars, for one call. Now run the same multi-step agent task both models used to need. On long horizon coding work like DeepSeek, Gemini 3.5 Flash burned 8,400 output tokens. Gemini 3.6 Flash did it in 3,100, a 63% cut, in line with the up to 65% figure Google and artificial analysis reported for that specific class of task. That's fewer reasoning steps and less verbosity per step, not a lower sticker price. Line it up against the competition and the cheapest model story falls apart fast. GPT-5 Mini runs about $0.25 input and $2 output, arguably a smaller tier competitor, but the comparison still stings on pure price. DeepSeek V4 Flash is even lower, $0.09 input and $0.18 output. Claude Haiku 4.5 sits around $1 input and $5 output. Gemini 3.6 Flash at $1.50 and $7.50 is not the budget option in its own weight class. Google's own Flash Lite variant at $0.30 and $2.50 undercuts it too. So Gemini 3.6. Flash isn't the cheapest model on the market, but that's the wrong comparison. Claude Opus 4.8 runs about $5 input and $25 output per 1M tokens, and GPT 5.6 Sol is close behind at roughly $5 and $30. By the way, I post one of these daily. Subscribe if local AI interests you. Against that tier, Gemini 3.6 Flash at $1.50 and $7.50 is doing something more interesting than undercutting other budget models. It's undercutting frontier pricing while closing in on frontier task performance. On raw reasoning, Gemini still trails in places. On ARC-AGI-2, a benchmark for novel abstract patterns, GPT 5.5 scores 84.6% against 72.1% for Gemini 3.5 Flash, a 12.5-point gap. That number is for 3.5 Flash specifically. The 3.6 figure wasn't independently confirmed at time of writing. Flip to MCP Atlas, a tool use benchmark, and Gemini leads 83.6% versus GPT 5.5's 75.3%. One benchmark aggregator also found Gemini 3.5 Flash, beating Claude Sonnet 4.6 on 5 of 7 shared benchmarks at half the input cost, though Sonnet keeps the edge on production software engineering. None of this is settled either. These leaderboards get rerun constantly as models get retested. The third model, Gemini 3.5 Flash Cyber, isn't for you or me. It's gated to governments and trusted partners only, Google's call, citing dual-use risk, framed as responsible disclosure tooling rather than a general-purpose product. In Google's own V8 JavaScript engine vulnerability test, Flash Cyber found 55 unique confirmed issues. Standard Gemini 3.5 Flash found 47. Claude Opus 4.6 found 36, including 10 issues the other two models missed entirely. That's Google's benchmark for the gated cyber variant specifically, not the public Gemini 3.6 Flash everyone else gets. The main Hacker News thread on this launch pulled 749 points and 573 comments, and the loudest complaint wasn't about what shipped, it was about what didn't. No update to Gemini 3.5 Pro. Postal Coder floated 3 theories. The model's uneconomical to run, Google's short on compute, or there's an unresolved alignment problem, and called Flash's benchmark standing solidly middle of pack outside of speed. Steve ATX 7600 called artificial analysis's methodology sketchy as hell, pointing out it runs 3 or fewer test repetitions when benchmarking frontier models live. Only Riel Cusso argued Google's holding roughly 50% margin on Flash pricing instead of racing competitors to the bottom. Riley 3000 pinned the missing Pro update on DeepMind attrition, and Gemini lacking the same coding tool feedback loop Claude and Codex get. Satvik Pendam pointed to Sundar Pichai's own admission that Google is a bit behind on agentic coding. Google's Logan Kilpatrick answered the criticism directly, saying Gemini 3.5 Pro is currently testing with partners and will ship as soon as it's ready. At $1.50 and $7.50 a million tokens, the cloud argument against Gemini looks weak for casual use. But cloud cost is per token, forever, no endpoint. Google's own open model, Gemma 4, is Apache 2.0 and runs from a Raspberry Pi 5 up to a 24 GB desktop GPU, depending on variant. It trails Gemini 3.6 Flash on raw capability, but it's yours once the hardware's paid off. No metering, no deprecation risk. And guardrails matter too. When Hugging Face needed to analyze real attack payloads from a security incident, commercial frontier APIs refused the job on safety grounds, so the team fell back to a local open weight model, GLM 5.2 instead. A second, smaller Hacker News thread, 74 points and 72 comments, raised the same worry from a different angle. Mixed reliability complaints from developers running Gemini for coding tasks in production. None of this makes the cloud option bad. It just means the calculus depends on how much you run and how often you hit a refusal. So here's my take. The headline claim needs an asterisk. Gemini 3.6 Flash at $1.50 input and $7.50 output per 1 M tokens didn't make expensive models pointless. GPT-5 Mini and DeepSeek V4 Flash at $0.09 and $0.18 are still cheaper. GPT 5.5 still beats it on ARC-AGI-2. What's actually true is narrower and more useful. Gemini 3.6 Flash beats Gemini 3.5 Flash by a wide margin on agentic coding and computer use tasks, and it does it at a price that would have required a genuinely frontier tier model a year ago. That's the real story. Not the death of expensive AI, the price of competence dropping fast enough that most everyday tasks stop caring which tier you pick. Google's already teasing Gemini 4 behind the scenes, so whatever frontier means keeps moving anyway. Google didn't kill expensive AI models. It moved the price of competence down again. If you want the local version of this story, Gemma 4 runs the same way, on your own hardware. I cover model drops like this every day. Subscribe to keep up.